To understand this book's perspective on God and subsequently Drury's theology, I think it's important to begin with her main thesis. She states, engaging in the practice of testimony develops and deepens authentic Christian faith for adolescents. Her underlining message throughout the book is the importance and significance of storiedness, and how that shapes particularly adolescence as a means of grace. Therefore, for Drury, she understands that God is not passive, rather God is active. And she talks about that God is noticeably present within the world and interacts with people. We are able to see and identify with parts of his workings, and so the story of God is still moving and being furthered today, therefore God is storied. This means that one can become involved and experience the story of God if one has awareness of it. And this is where the main argument for the necessity of testimony stems from. To testify is to profess one's experience of the story of God intersecting with their own. Drury wants teenagers to be able to articulate their faith, not in order to determine whether or not they are Orthodox Christians, but because she understands this kind of articulation as a formative for the spiritual identity of the teenager. Articulation does not mean one's faith is more authentic or valid, rather it refers to its fostering of one's understanding of reality. She states on page 44, while articulation may not affect my status before God, it may affect the way I understand God to be at work in my life and subsequently how I respond to God. Therefore, human language does not make God's converting work more of a reality. It may help adolescents recognize where God is present and lay claim to it in their life, thereby enriching their faith. Just like how God is storied, Drury believes that the lives of youth and emerging adults are also storied. The lives of youth and emerging adults are dependent on hearing and interpreting stories. Stories help us orient ourselves in society, Drury argues. They help us understand who we are and how we relate to society. The lives of youth and emerging adults are influenced by countless stories they hear or have heard, whether from parents or guardians, friends, school teachers, and classmates, or even narratives from new media. So Drury asserts that adolescents are coming to a point in their maturity where they're beginning to grasp the concept that their lives are storied. And she believes that there is a real impact on their identity development as adolescents are beginning to articulate their own story. She is most concerned about adolescents articulating their spiritual narrative and thereby forming their spiritual identity. And so she argues that if people are not actively articulating their narrative understanding of their faith journeys, they risk a disruption similar to a person with amnesia. Regardless of how often a teenager attends their church, if she is unable to articulate some kind of narrative concerning where God is present in her life, she risks upheaval of her spiritual identity. The daunting task of asking adolescents to grapple with their lives as stories is made less foreboding knowing that this is done in the context of community. Hence, this is the purpose of youth and emerging adult ministry. Communities are needed to receive the testimony. There is not a testimony without someone there to receive it. Those who hear the testimony are not merely listening devices that impartially take in the testimony. Those who hear the testimony receive it. They are pulled into the scene and are part of the story, Drury argues. She envisions a youth or emerging adult ministry that provides adolescents with training to help them see where God is at work in one's life, helping them with the language to narrate these experiences, providing them with a framework in which to interpret these experiences, and finally, a space and opportunity to speak these experiences. Drury has convinced me of the importance of verbal articulation or externalization of one's faith among youth and emerging adults as a means of grace. I resonate with her concern that it is not that adolescents are speaking incorrectly of God, it's that they are seldom speaking of God at all. They are speechless and don't know how to articulate their religious experiences. I think youth groups or young adult ministries need to be sanctuaries to counter this trend of adolescent speechlessness of God. Instead of talking at youth and emerging adults, I now see the importance of letting them talk to us. I now believe more than ever that testifying is a means of grace where God forms us as we speak. And further, I see the importance of letting youth and young adults hear from one another. Drury speaks of a vicarious faith where the testimonies of peers resonate with and spur spiritual growth among youth and emerging adults. I think it takes two things: a redefining of the practice and or tradition of testifying, and a leader or leaders who are committed to the practice of testifying. First, as Drury rightfully points out, the Christian practice of testifying is nothing novel, yet its practice and its noticeable decline give rise to false or at best insufficient understandings of the practice of Christian testimonies. Testimonies need to be spoken of as opportunities for people to be changed as they speak and or as they hear testimonies. Second, to realize a vision of a youth or emerging adult ministry incorporating testimony as a regular spiritual practice takes a leader or leaders who facilitate this. Leaders who model seeing God in their daily lives for youth and emerging adults, fostering the exposure and rehearsal of talking about God among them and making space for adolescents to verbalize their testimony.